Our last section that we'll talk about is immunodiagnostics, and we're not going to go into all the details of this because there's just a couple of things that tend to get asked around this particular issue, and I'm by no means an expert in this. But one of the questions that often is asked is complement fixation. So what is that? Well, we know that complement comes along when you have an antibody in an antigen complex, okay? And then you can get the complement fixation. The complement proteins are going to fixate on that, and then it's going to potentially cause cell lysis, okay? So the way that you would want to test, let's say you suspect that your patient has an antigen, an antibody, and a complement formation. And so what you do is you heat up this particular beaker, okay? And by heating it up, you're going to kill off the complement. You're going to denature those complement proteins, so that all you're left with, theoretically, if your patient has, let's say, for example, Q fever or something of that nature, all you're left with is the antigen antibody, not the complement. And then what you do is you pour in fresh complement along with sheep red blood cells and sheep red antibodies to the sheep red blood cells. So you know that if nothing else is happening in here and the complement doesn't get used up by what your body or your patient already has in terms of antigen antibody, as soon as you put in those sheep red blood cells with an anti-sheep red blood cell and complement, that will lyse and this will turn red. Okay, so it would turn red. And again, it's because, you know, the red blood cells, when they lyse, they're going to turn red. So in that case, you would know if they did turn red that you didn't have any of this. You didn't have anything. Okay, you didn't have, in your patient, you did not have an antigen antibody complex. And I was looking for my red pen, don't seem to find it. Let's pretend that we've got green blood here. Anyway, this is blue. Oh, there it is. My apologies. So if you didn't have any, you have bumpkus in terms of this. So it's freshy fresh, there's no antigen antibody, and you put the sheep red blood cells, that's what it's going to look like, okay? However, if you actually had antigen antibody complex, you put the sheep and the anti-sheep and the complement, well, as soon as you put the complement in, he's going to bind to this, okay? And you'll never get the red because you don't have any complement left to lyse those red blood cells, those the red blood cells that would be dying because you put anti-sheep into the sheep. So let's answer a question on that, and I think hopefully that'll make sense. Number one is, in a typical complement fixation test, complement is bound to what? And the answer is C, the antigen antibody complex. What we just said here, complement is there, it's bound to that. You heat it up, you denature it, and then you test to see if it's going to bind to that again. And that's how you do that. If it's clear, you know that there was an antigen antibody, you know it's Q fever. If it turns red, you know there was none of this, and it's just the sheep guts that are getting blown up in this case, or the sheep blood, I should say. Number two is, you did a complement fixation test to determine if your patient had suspected antigen antibody complex. When you added the sheep red blood cells and the sheep red blood cell antibodies and complement to your patient's serum, the test tube remained clear and there was no lysis of the sheep red blood cells. This means the test was what? It means that it was A, positive for the suspected antigen antibody complex. Okay, number three is, in a complement fixation test, the reason that the sheep red blood cells, okay, in terms of the sheep red blood cell and sheep red blood cell antigen and complement do not lyse and turn red when added to your patient's serum is what? And the answer is A, the complement is used up already. So it's already sticking to this guy, okay? It gets immediately, as soon as you put complement and the red blood cells, etc., boom, the complement gets stuck to your antigen antibody complex. So the answer is A, and it's belonging to your patient there. That complex, it belongs to the patient. So in terms of complement fixation, essentially the thing that you want to ask yourself is, did the beaker turn red or didn't it turn red? If it turned red, that means that you had complement available to fix and lyse that sheep red blood cell / sheep red blood cell antigen complex. If it didn't turn red, in that case, that meant that your complement was used up. Used up by who? Used up by your patient who already had a preformed antigen antibody complex in that serum. So that's essentially the crux of that. I'll ask one more question at the very end of that because it can be a little bit confusing. But question 4 is, this is slightly different. This is another question that is liked, and it's the direct Coombs versus the indirect Coombs. And without going into the details of the Coombs test, essentially the way that I think about it is, it sort of depends if you're going to do a Coombs or indirect Coombs on what you want to test for. So if you take your patient's serum and you want to see, do they have an antibody, just a straight up by himself antibody, okay? I think of antibody, and I've said this before, but I just want to revisit it. Antibody, you're testing only for the antibody. That is antibody, 2 words, which is equal to, in Coombs speak, indirect. Okay, so antibody, indirect Coombs. As opposed to, if you want to see if the antibody is already bound, okay, to the antigen on the cell. So here's a little antigen on the cell, and you want to see if the antibody, this little Fab portion, is binding to this. Then in that case, it is simply a direct, okay, direct Coombs test. So it's already bound. If you want to see if it's already bound to that cell, that's a direct Coombs. So let's do a question. Number 4 is, if you wanted to test for maternal antibody prior to it binding on the little guy's Rh positive, aka antigen D, on the fetal red blood cell, you would do which of the following? Would you do direct or indirect? Well, all you want to do is test for maternal antibody prior to it binding on anything. So in that case, you're going to do a indirect. So the answer is B. Number 5, if you wanted to test if the maternal antibody had already bound to the fetal red blood cell, Rh positive antigen. So it's already bound in this case, right? Her antibody, this is the little guy's red blood cell, and this is his Rh positive, and this is her anti-Rh positive antibody. If it's already bound, then that's a direct Coombs. So the answer in that case would be A. Number 6 is, if you suspected your patient had hemolytic disease of the newborn and wanted to test the newborn's blood. So this time you're going to take newborn blood, okay? That is, see if there were antibodies already bound with the Rh positive RBCs, which test would you use? So again, operative word, already bound. So that's going to be the direct Coombs. So that is answer B. Number 7, if you wanted to see if the mother had antibodies in her serum to antigen D, which test would you use? Again, antibodies. I know I keep asking the same question, but it will come potentially to you in exams, so that's why I go through it. All you want is to know if she has antibodies. Antibodies, indirect Coombs. Okay. Number 8 is, if you do a complement, back to complement fixation test to determine if your patient has Q fever. Okay. If your patient does not have Q fever, no Q fever, there's no antigen antibody complex, what are you going to see? Okay, in this case, you're going to see a red, red test tube or vial or whatever, okay? Because as soon as you put the sheep red blood cell, anti-sheep red blood cell, you've got complement to blow it up. It's going to blow it up, it's going to fixate on it, and you're going to end up with lysis. And so the answer would be A, lysis of sheep red blood cells in a cloudy red test tube. And that concludes the immunodiagnostics. The last thing I want to say on this immuno discussion in general is in terms of test taking strategies. So a lot of times questions around immunology can be very convoluted in terms of, very long stems. So I recommend that, in fact, I recommend in all questions that you do is that you read the last sentence first so that you know what you're looking for. The second thing, like I said, is it too much immunity that we're talking about or too little? Are we talking about innate? Or are we talking about adaptive? Are we talking about B cells or T cells? And then cytokines. The whole thing sort of revolves around cytokines because oftentimes, or adhesion molecules, because oftentimes the drugs target that. So keep going through those cytokines and make sure that you're just recalling them all the time as though they're your own name or the alphabet, because that's going to really help you. And the thing about immunology is it doesn't end with the immuno class. You just keep going over and over again, tested with the same questions. And then the last thing to say is just, is be confident. It's a very powerful tool, especially if you start looking at, if you categorize the diseases, like the beautiful way that they have hypersensitivity described. So if you get confused, you can always sort of use your immuno to help you answer questions if you go back to that hypersensitivity. Again, type 1 is IgE mediated, that's allergy. Depending, it can be hives and urticaria, but most of the time that's going to be type 2. Type 2 hypersensitivity is going to be your antigen antibody. Type 3 is going to be a vasculitis, that's immune complex, and type 4 is cell mediated, which is T cell mediated. Delayed type hypersensitivity, granuloma formation. So those are the things that you want to really focus on for immuno as you go forward. And thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.